This year constitutes the Bicentenary of the founders of the Baha'i faith. The Bab, meaning the gate, in the Baha'i scriptures refer to him as the herald of the faith, and Baha'u'llah, meaning the glory of God. What is the Baha'i faith? It's a set of belief that upholds the unity of God, recognizes the unity of His prophets, and inculcates the principle of the oneness and wholeness of the entire human race. It proclaims the necessity and the inevitability of the unification of mankind. Whatever we go through is not out of chaos or out of confusion. It is part and parcel of the evolutionary process of the spiritual consciousness of human beings. The Baha'i faith was founded in 1844 in the city of Shiraz in Iran. Today it has a worldwide community of over 8 million in every country and territory on earth, and the followers come from every tribe, every set of belief, and every part of the globe. The Bab, meaning the gate, in the Baha'i scriptures refer to him as the herald of the faith or the forerunner, and is the first of the twin prophets of the Baha'i dispensation. Baha'u'llah, meaning the glory of God. For those who have Christian background, this has a biblical origin. And he is the second of the twin prophets, founders of this dispensation. The Bab, who has the status of the herald of the Baha'i faith, in 1844, on May 22nd, he made a pronouncement that brought to an end a process that had started way before that, for 30, 40 years prior to his declaration on the 22nd of May, 1844. An entire scholarly movement had predicted the imminent appearance of a new manifestation of God who would be the promised one of Islam. Not much different from the Christian scholarly predictions that had emerged in Germany and elsewhere in Europe, where they believed that the second coming of Christ was imminent. It was pretty much concurrent. One was in the Middle East, one was in the middle of Europe. But on the 22nd of May, 1844, the Bab brought this process to an end, a categoric end, and to some extent to a dramatic end. That announcement, much like an earthquake, sent tremors in theological, social, as well as political structures of Iran and Iraq at the time. Iran and Iraq at that time were, and to some extent they are still, the heartbeat of Shia Islam. And their claim, the Bab's claim that I am, or he was, the promised one of their belief was as dramatic, as stupendous as the claim of the return of Christ or the appearance of Messiah for those who come from Judaic or Islam or Christian background. So the Bab's claim challenged the establishment, the religious establishment, the political establishment, and 6 years of imprisonment and persecution of the Bab from city to city, from prison to prison. Ultimately, the establishment resolved, the political establishment, that the social upheavals that the claim of the Bab precipitated in Iran and in Iraq was not going to end unless until he, the Bab, was eliminated himself. So the decree was to execute him. A very defining moment in the brief history of the Bab's life, happened during June-July of 1848. An event that for the Bahá'í history is known as the Badasht Conference. It's a conference in which the Báb's claim to be the promised one of Islam was categorically and clearly announced and established. Up to then, there were a lot of speculations whether his claim was to be the forerunner of the promised one, or was he the one? And even amongst his followers, there were disputes as to whether it was a new religion or whether he was a kind of reformist in the Islamic dispensation. It was in this conference in 1848 that his claim was made very clear. And very importantly, some of his new teachings, including the emancipation of women, was pronounced in the most dramatic and categoric way by one of his followers called Tahare, who was the poet or poetess with very established religious as well as scholarly credentials at the time. Ultimately, on the 9th of July, the Prime Minister at that time got the go-ahead from the king that the Báb had to be executed. With a regiment of 250 soldiers at this barrack in city of Tabriz, he was executed. His bullet-ridden body in the middle of the night was rescued by some of his followers, and that body was kept in secret for 50 years from place to place, mostly in private secret places, and traveled from the northern part of Iran through Iraq, Turkey, and ultimately ended up in 1901 on Mount Carmel in Haifa. At that time, Haifa was under the control of the Ottoman Empire. Today, the shrine of the Báb, the place where his body was buried, is one of the holy places and a place of pilgrimage for his followers. For those of you who might have been to Haifa, this is what it looks like now. So that is where the resting place of the Báb at the moment is. As I mentioned, it's a holy place of pilgrimage for the Baha'is. And the terraces within which the shrine is located, again, has a biblical origin. It is not by accident that it's designed the way it is designed, nor is it by accident that where it is where it is. I don't have time to go to some of the historic background, but the book of Isaiah describes the day in which the kings shall come, disembark at the bay, and go up the mountains. And these terraces are designed in terms of those biblical prophecies. But let me move on to Baha'u'llah, given my time. As the second prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, Baha'u'llah means the glory of God. And his ministry follows the ministry of the Báb, who during his time repeatedly and clearly prophesied that soon him whom God shall make manifest will establish a bigger dispensation and usher in a new cycle in human consciousness known as the cycle of fulfillment, as the cycle of unification. As the establisher of peace and the creator of the cycle of fulfillment. Again, we'll come back to some of this concept in the second and third session to unpack what this all mean, these terms, what does it mean for our day-to-day life. I'm not a theologian, as you know. I'm more interested in everything from a social systemic point of view. So with that bias, I'll return to some of these statements in the second and third session. On the 12th of November, Baha'u'llah was born in Iran into a well-known aristocratic family. He was from childhood known for his kindness, his care of the poor, and his lack of care for earthly positions and possessions. He was and he became a prominent follower of the Bab himself. Amongst the followers of the Bab, he was revered and respected. And of course, when the Bab was executed in 1950, Baha'u'llah soon emerged as a potential successor. The Babi community at that time was pretty much fragmented, beleaguered, and literally, socially, and economically tormented right across the country. In August 1852, two Babis made an assassination against the life of the king at that time, and because Baha'u'llah was known as the leader of the Babis, he was arrested on the charge of being the ringleader of this assassination, and that constituted or started a 40-year of imprisonment from place to place. The path of his banishment from Tehran to Baghdad to Istanbul, Adrianople, and via the Egyptian port of Alexandria, ultimately to the prison city of Akka. But on April 21st, Baha'u'llah was, as a prisoner in Baghdad, made his stupendous announcement. Outside of Baghdad, he made the categorical and open announcement that he was indeed the one that Bab said, him whom God shall make manifest. And that made the announcement, according to Baha'u'llah, was not just an Islamic prophecy. It wasn't the fulfillment of the prophecies of the promised one of Islam. He declared himself as the promised one of all ages, of Christians, of the Buddhists, of the Jews, and all others. And that, of course, was no small claim, and that pronouncement made the opposition by the Ottoman Empire and the persecution of the Baha'is so much more severe. On 12th of December 1863, Baha'u'llah was sent or banished to Adrianople as a prisoner. And here some very important historic events took place. He personally wrote for the first time to all the rulers of the time, rulers of political establishment and religious establishment, not of Muslim but also of Christian, not of the East but also of the West. And some of the kings and rulers and emperors who were direct recipients of his letters or tablets, you can see there from Queen Victoria of UK, bearing in mind that at that time Britain was the empire that had 40% of the globe under its rule, to Napoleon III, to the rulers of the Tsar of Russia, and so on and so forth. Again, for me as a student of social science, Baha'u'llah's pronouncements in that time of the history, 1852, to rulers of the time from a socio-political and economic point of view, were as relevant as it is today. And of course, the Americas at that time, not as prominent, and yet Baha'u'llah wrote to rulers of the Americas broadly, both North America and South America, collectively. So that is a turning point in the history of the Baha'i faith in terms of making religion directly relevant to socio-economic of life, to power base, political power base, religious power base, and economic power base. Baha'u'llah remained, despite being a prisoner, popular. His followers traveled on foot, at times for months, from Iran and Iraq and Ottoman Empire at that time, Turkish today, to pay pilgrimage to him. Despite the hardship, the followers continued his path, followed him almost non-stop, and the flow of communication between him and the followers never stopped. Of course, between 1879 and 1892, Baha'u'llah, after the revolutions or the revolt of the Young Turks, as they called them in the Ottoman Empire, Baha'u'llah was released, still a prisoner, but under home arrest or house arrest, and stayed at a mansion of Bahji, which at that time was built by one of the local Palestinian prominent individuals, and the family of Baha'u'llah rented this place for him to be under house arrest there. On May 29th, Baha'u'llah passed away and buried in one of the buildings very adjacent to that mansion. That resting place is another point of pilgrimage, as well as the point of adoration for the daily obligatory prayers of the international Baha'i community. That place now looks like this. That mansion that you saw is now been converted to a place of pilgrimage. It is important to note that the Baha'is do not have priests. They do not have clergymen. They are not allowed to make money from the running of religious communities. And these administrative bodies therefore work both at international and national level. At the international level, 9 members full-time every 5 years. At the national level, 9 members elected every year. Again, all these bodies are served by individuals on voluntary basis. There is no payment. At the United Nations, as I mentioned, the international Baha'i community has the observer status. The Baha'is historically have been involved in the League of Nations, as well as in the formation, in the charters, the constitutions of the United Nations. This is part of their belief, and they have been active, and they remain active in various programs of women's rights, environmental issues, children, issues that relates to the welfare of humankind. But for now, Baha'u'llah says, and it's something to remember and reflect on, says, what is the essence of faith? Is the fewness of words and abundance of deeds. That's what we'll reflect on, and tomorrow and the day after, I'll unpack this sentence. Yesterday, I introduced the founding prophets, went through their history as fast as I could, fairly mechanically. Today, what I'd like to do is to discuss the perspective that the Baha'i faith offers on religion itself and human civilization. I want to invite you for a minute or two to go through this defining framework that comes from Baha'i holy writings. The purpose of divine messengers and the revelation of the heavenly books and the establishment of the religion of God has been no other than to create amity and justice between the children of the races. True religion is the foundation of a spiritual union, the union of thought, the union of susceptibilities, the unity of customs, and the ideal chain binding together all the children of men. Through its practical realization, the minds and souls will receive development by divine instruction. They will become assisted to investigate reality, attain to a lofty station of wisdom, and establish the basis of a divine civilization. Now, it is quite clear that the insights offered in this text could not be more far from what we observe around ourselves, no matter in which corner of the earth we are. Because religion has become synonymous with tension, confrontation, killing, invasion, brutality, fundamentalism, and destruction, many a times, destruction of amity among children of men. Whereas the Baha'i faith offers a completely, almost 180 degrees diametrically opposed to what true religion should be and how we should understand religion. It's really in this context that the purpose of religion and its impact on human civilization is what I find it exciting, and I'd like to share some thoughts on it. You would have noticed that in this text already, as it frames the issue, the Baha'i faith defines religion and not religions. And that's a very central point of what I'm going to discuss in this session. It relates to an insight that the Baha'i writings offer, and the Bab has written volumes on the unity of reality, the singleness of reality. So the implications of progressive revelation, which is one of the fundamental insights that the Baha'i faith offers in this dispensation, bearing in mind that, as I mentioned yesterday very briefly, the claim that the Bab made is that his revelation, his pronouncement, or his claim, if you like, was the end of a cycle of human consciousness and the beginning of a new cycle, which will last thousands of years, possibly as long as 500,000 years. And in this cycle, our understanding as human beings, as spiritual beings, will evolve to a different level. And the longer and the deeper and the wider our spiritual consciousness evolves, so will become our impact on our surroundings, the way we will define our physical, or if you like, material existence. Because we have a material existence and we have spiritual existence. And these two are not separable, however much religious leaders in the past cycles have attempted to separate the two. That this is your physical being and this is your spiritual being. The Bab says the two are inseparable unity. Any attempt to separate the two, any attempt to put a divide for whatever reason between our physical reality and our spiritual reality is actually mutilating an existence that cannot be separated. And if we do it, we are now corrupting the religion of God. We are not benefiting from it. We are turning it into a factor of confusion, a cause of division, and a source of enmity, not amity. So it's very fundamental in Baha'i writings that we should not separate this, and we should in fact find religion as the source of insight into the reality in which we as a spiritual beings should function. So the notion of progressive revelation in essence suggests that there is God as a source of being, and the mechanism through which, the portals via which insights, spiritual nourishment, if you prefer, guidance, and principles are conveyed to humanity, go through successive phases, successive revelations, successive manifestations. And in fact, the Baha'i scriptures offers a new terminology. It doesn't favor the use of prophets or messengers of God, although it uses it very frequently. It prefers to use the term manifestation of God, meaning Christ, Moses, Krishna, Buddha, Prophet Muhammad, the Bab and Baha'u'llah, and whoever comes after them are in fact manifestations of divine reality, manifesting attributes of God, whatever we call him. Interreligious tensions also disappears the minute that we reconceptualize the notion of religion. For example, if we see, and this is a very elementary but very powerful means of, if there is a God and humanity, all of us, wherever we are, if manifestations of God, or as we know them, prophets of God, are the portals of bringing attributes of God to humanity, there has been many, many prophets in the past we have no record of. But we've heard of Abraham, we have records of Moses, we have more records of Jesus, and we have even more records of Muhammad, and we have more records, because as we have developed technology and we have managed to record some evidences of them, either oral or written, we have more evidence that these manifestations of God, or these messengers of God, were the source of bringing guidance from God to humanity. But they're all chapters of the same revelation. They are the same they are all manifestations of the same reality, God. We don't understand them. We will never as human beings understand or be in a position to understand the essence of God, but we will always, in our own nano as well as in our collective way, we will be able to feel, understand the manifestations of attributes of God. And of course, importantly, and just in case that my illustration causes confusion, Baha'u'llah makes it quite clear that this is not the end. It will continue. And as we grow more and more conscious, so will be more manifestations of God emerging. So this insight has far-reaching implications, a very exciting insight. Exciting in the sense that it once and for all resolves this issue of, is it the last one? Is it a superior one? This is actually the wrong question. There is no beginning, there is no end to the process of perfection of human consciousness. And therefore we should rethink, reconceptualize, and redefine religion, and go back to a different beginning. The Bab called that the commencement of a cycle of fulfillment, the cycle of unification, a cycle in which the consciousness of humanity, irrespective of their origin, tribal, gender, or any other form, will begin to converge on a different understanding of what our relationship is, what our purpose in life is, and what our responsibility towards our physical reality should be. And the entire web of Baha'i teachings revolves around the creation of this new consciousness that would have a new breed of human beings with a different understanding in that sense. In this new cycle, the cycle of unification and fulfillment, a very important part is to recognize that from the days that our forefathers were in the cave and the hunter-gatherers, and then we became successively located along the rivers where agriculture took place, and the cities emerged, and the city-state emerged, and the notion of nation emerged out of various fighting tribes. We have now reached a point where the interplay of a spiritual insight and material progress, industrial progress, has brought us to a point that we now got to think not nations. We now have no choice but to think, for the first time, of humankind. some very important points is an important principle that religion should be in accordance with science. This tension between science and religion, again, Baha'i writing suggests that it is fairly artificial. It's not substantive in the sense that both religion and science are the two wings on which human progress must fly. And this is just one quotation from, again, Abdul Bahá's talk in Paris, talking to a group of, at that time, atheist socialist society. We are distinctive as creatures insofar as we are intelligent, in the sense that we can, through intellectual inquiry, discover the rules of our existence. We can discover the law of gravity. We can fly. We can go under the sea. We can go deeper. We can create missiles and shoot it. Unfortunately, at the time, or for the time being, for negative, destructive purposes, but it could actually become a positive force if we use the same intelligence. So our intelligence, which has now created sciences which are wonderful for our material existence, should not be pitched against religion. Everything that has been revealed, everything that the Baha'is experiment globally and put into practice revolves around one and only one thing, and that is ways and means of the unification of whole humankind. And that is the stage in which you and I go through. We cannot disregard it. We cannot divorce ourselves from it. We are part of it, whether we like it or not. And that's an important, from a societal point of view, where I, as a student of social science, continually ask myself, what is our role now? What should we be doing now? I find this incredibly instructive as to how to use it as an intellectual compass as to what is happening around us. And that, to me, I find it very exciting that at the moment we are going through a transition from the phase of nation building to a phase of human being building. We need to find new rules. The rules of the past do not work for today. The more we try to take the current situation to the past, the more we find them they don't fit. They create tension, friction. And therefore we need to rethink. We need to recast our mindset first and foremost. And equally importantly, we have to recast our spiritual emotions and energy. We have to reframe the questions in order to be able to find the right answers. The earth is but one country and mankind is citizens. If we can recast our spiritual, emotional, and intellectual queries towards a simple principle, we'll find new solutions. Because not every question at every point in time is a quite correct question. Very often the question is wrong. And therefore we spend a lot of resources, a lot of energy looking for an answer to a wrong question. So we need to align our spiritual entity with our intellectual inquiry, because one curbs the type of questions that we ask. Is it not? Because the spiritual being, our ethical framework, defines what questions are the right questions. And when we ask the right questions with the guide of our spiritual compass, if you like, then our intellectual capability is there to serve us to find the right answers. And this is, in my understanding, how the Baha'i faith reframes religion, redefines civilization, and reestablishes the technical relationship between one source of insight and inspiration and creativity with another, and creates an alignment. So religion, instead of becoming a source of division, enmity, destruction, animosity becomes a force, an inspiration, an insight for creating an environment in which the earth is but one country and mankind is citizens. In the last session, I tried to share what the Baha'i view was on religion and human civilization and the interrelations between the two. What I'd like to do now is to bring it to now, to the conditions that we face. Wherever we are in the globe, what are some of the issues that we face? What are the top challenges that humanity, irrespective of where we are, we face? This is the top 15, not by any stretch of imagination a comprehensive list, but this is the list that socio-economic, political strategies nowadays consider as the top 15. I like to then say, well, how do we understand the Baha'i teachings and how do they relate to these challenges of our time? Because remember, the whole purpose of back to the first session, Baha'u'llah made it quite clear to the rulers of the time that religion has to relate to the conditions of human beings. It's about the welfare of human beings, not just individually, but also collectively. And that message has to then permeate now to say, well, how does the Baha'i teachings relate to the challenges that we face? Baha'u'llah says, the world's equilibrium has been upset through the vibrating influence of this most great, this new world order. Mankind's ordered life has been revolutionized through the agency of this unique, this wondrous system, the like of which mortal eyes have never witnessed. It is a systemic situation. It has no particular region immune to it, no particular segment blamed for it and or accredited. This is a transmutation of one system to another. And as we go, in the language of economics, as we go from one equilibrium to another, in the transition, a whole lot of instability happens. The closest I could think of, and you may have better examples, the closest that I could think of was in our personal progress. When we are a child, we are peaceful creatures. When we become a bit older, 8, 9, 10, 11, we are very cute and obliging. Everybody loves us, and hits the teenage years. Before we mature and sort of stabilize. In this teenage phase, we are very troublesome because it's a phase in the evolution of one phase to another. Likewise, I suggest that our human evolution, spiritually, materially, and consciousness-wise, is moving from one equilibrium towards another, mature and more stable, but we are in this phase of teenage years. We think we are adult, we look big and strong, but we are in an internal turmoil of one sort or another. So Baha'u'llah says that this world equilibrium has been upset and we are moving towards a new order, a new system. The world in truth is moving on towards its destiny. The interdependence of the peoples and nations of the earth, whatever the leaders of the divisive forces of the world may say or do, is already an accomplished fact. Its unity in the economic sphere is now understood and recognized. The welfare of the part means the welfare of the whole. And the distress of the part brings distress to the whole. Adversity prolonged, this is the build-up to the World War II, afflictive allied to chaos and universal destruction, must needs convulse the nations, stir the conscience of the world, disillusion the masses, precipitate a radical change in the very conception of the society, and coalesce ultimately the disjointed, the bleeding limbs of mankind into one body, single, organically united and indivisible. As a student of economics, when I read these things 30 years ago, the economic bit of it made perfect sense because of the globalization, because of the trade and interconnectedness of our welfare. But the rest of it has been a learning for me to see that more and more other components of this world order, meaning the societal, the cultural, the ideological, the music, the dance, the notion of various challenges that you saw in those 15 wheel of challenges that we face, each one of them became more and more evident that what is happening to the system is coalescing towards a new formation, a new system. And for that, we need to ask, what are the factors, what are the root causes that is causing this disorder? We talk about the world order, but increasingly it's quite clear that there is actually more disorder than order. We have to say, well, what are the factors that are cultivating this type of disorderly behavior? And Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the Baha'i faith back in 1930s, identified a few factors. Top of his list is materialism. The fact that we have become as human beings materialistic. Everything is defined. Development itself is defined in terms of development. Some nations are developed, some are not. And if you ask, well, why these are not developed, it's because they don't have this type of materialistic symbols of development. The second factor, contributing factor to the growing disorder, is individualism. The sense that we have lost our sense of community. We have more and more individualistically defining utility. Our utilitarian definition of what life is about is what is good for me. Yes, I have a conscience, I'll appease it, but most importantly, I need to take care of me, and there are three important players in life, is I, me, and myself. The third is nationalism. Shoghi Effendi defines nationalism as the third contributor to the corrosion of the social cohesion amongst communities of human beings. And the fourth one is prejudice. And prejudice is everywhere, everywhere. Even now, with all our advancements, if we sit on one of my favorite intellectual exercises is, if we sit on one of these spaceships and sort of rise above the earth, we will be amazed to see that the 7 billion people who run around, what type of prejudices they have. So what do we do in this situation? As a constructive, radical, but a constructive approach is to see it this way. The call of Baha'u'llah is primarily directed against all forms of provincialism, all insularities and prejudices. If long-cherished ideals and time-honored institutions, if certain social assumptions and religious formulae have ceased to promote the welfare of the generality of mankind, if they no longer minister to the needs of a continually evolving humanity, let them be swept away and relegated to the limbo of obsolescence and forgotten doctrines. Why should these, in a world subject to the immutable law of change and decay, be exempt from the deterioration that must needs overtake every human institution? For legal standards, political and economic theories are solely designed to safeguard the interests of humanity as a whole, and not humanity to be crucified for the preservation of the integrity of any particular law or doctrine. So if you put humanity and its welfare at the center of our thinking, anything that is not conducive to it, it has to be rethought. Not that we should fit in, suffer, because the doctrine must be proven right, whatever it is. So in this context, the Baha'i teachings are configured to deal with these specific issues. And I've selected a few to deal with the 15 challenges that we have. In fact, 15 is also itself as a reductionist, there's a lot more. Abolition of all forms of prejudice, of racial, gender, generation, or age, of tribal, of any form. Equality of rights of men and women, which is central to the teachings, the social teachings and economic teachings of the Baha'i faith. Provision of universal education, central to a lot of these issues that we discussed. Harmony of science and religion. Yesterday I spent some time on it. It is about not putting religious insight and scientific insights as inimical or as contradicting each other. Abolition of extremes of wealth and poverty. Again, a great deal of writings in the writings of the Prophet, the introduction of an international auxiliary language as an important element of integrative agent, that so people can talk to each other, they can understand each other. The establishment of a global governance system is another chapter which is relevant for a great deal of those challenges that was in that wheel. A lot of those 15 issues, beginning with the top one, which is environment, is because environmental management transcends national boundaries. Therefore, you need to have a binding, respected, legitimate global governance to be able to deal with issues of transnational nature. It is painful to give up what you've been brought up with, because you were told this is how life is, and this is what success is, and this is who we are, and this is what your pride is, should be. If you're a man like this. If you're a woman, you're like this. If you're a British like this, and you're an American like this. And then you got to sit back and say, it doesn't work, I have to rethink it. It's a painful death pang of what defines me as a human being. So that's how I like to stop here and get your comments and any questions, any views that you may have. Ladies first, in the back.
If the Baha'i communicate on other communities who are also trying to do positive things and change ethics, etc.
Yes, absolutely. Baha'is do not see lines of I'm a Baha'i and you are not.
Officially trying to work together.
Absolutely, they're encouraged to go out of their way to find like-minded human beings without prejudice, without judgment, to work towards what is conducive to collective welfare. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Two questions.
Yeah.
One, is there an active attempt by people of the Baha'i faith to expand? You're doing it in the context of a university talk, but is there an obligation on every Baha'i member of the Baha'i faith to try and recruit, convince people that there is a philosophy of, another philosophy of life? And secondly, do the Baha'i have any communal worship or get together, or how does it actually operate as a community?
Very good question. The first one, a nuanced one, Baha'is are forbidden from, I think in English is proselytization, meaning converting people. They are forbidden from converting people, but they are obliged to share information. So why I'm standing in front of you is not to convert you, because far be it from me to make that judgment for you. But I'm obliged to inform you, to share every opportunity that I get to share information. You may hear it and say it's a whole lot of nonsense. It's your choice, I love you still. Or you might say, wow, this is exciting, let me go and have a look at it. Number two, yes, there is a great deal of community activities. Wherever there are Baha'is, they have prayer meetings, they have community meetings for the affairs of the community every 19 days, and it is a worldwide system. It doesn't, there is no priest who says, okay, I think we should do it this way. My way is better than his way, or in Japan we're doing it better than Bolivia. No, that system is uniform. There's an administrative order from 1921 that Shoghi Effendi put in place globally, and it's under the guidance of local spiritual assembly, as I tried to explain, at the local level, then national spiritual assembly at every nation, and the Universal House of Justice at the global level.
Could you perhaps describe the spiritual obligations and
Yeah.
how the covenant
Yes.
is the covenant for religions and in this new dispensation?
Spiritual obligations, obviously a personal issue. There are obligatory prayers, for example, every day, but you do it yourself. And nobody judges you. Nobody watches whether you are a good believer or a bad believer. Baha'u'llah says that if you have time to judge others, spend it on yourself, because you know yourself better than anybody else. So don't waste your time on judging others. spend it on yourself.
Two questions actually. First one is, can you give us an idea of the distribution of the Bahá'ís, the 8 million across the world? Roughly, where are they?
Yeah.
And the second question is, I believe Bahá'ís are not allowed to vote in political elections, general elections, elections. And how does that reflect on, because everything you've talked about is very much, I was going to say a political sort of viewpoint, because you're actually encompassing the whole world. And I know the Bahá'ís are very strong in terms of working at the UN, which in effect is the ultimate sort of political body.
Yeah, the first one, the best I can offer is to actually, because it gets updated on the website, they always say where the countries are, and there is a website of all the countries. But to give you an idea, for example, on the continent of Africa, and it always changes, the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Africa, Congo, has got the largest number of Baha'is in the most organized way, although Egypt has the oldest. Back in, as you saw, Baha'u'llah stopped briefly in Alexandria, so the origin of the Baha'i communities in Africa goes back to Egypt as the first, and Ethiopia. But today the largest community is in the DRC. With respect to your second question of participation in voting, yes, the Baha'is are allowed to vote. Where the Baha'is are not allowed to do is to take partisan position. I cannot be a member of, in this country, any political party. But can I vote for them come election? The guideline is sit and think who of all these candidates of these parties or individuals align to your judgment to the best that they can serve the community. And then you are free to vote. And if your answer is none of them is actually, in my judgment, fits the bill, you may want to abstain. So that's the guideline at the moment. Yes, sir.
Isn't one of them fake news? Because you're getting now that you can get reinforcement for the news you want.
Mm-hmm.
And this tends to increase the polarization.
Mm-hmm.
If you're an American and you're right-wing, you can watch Fox News
Yeah.
and don't worry about anything else. If you're not right-wing, you can look at the Washington Post and ignore everything else. And all you're doing is splitting the thing more and more, which is exactly the opposite of what you try to do.
Exactly.
Then another issue is education. You say universal education. And of course it depends on what that universal education gives. If you've got a country where the education is forcing them to think in some straitjacket way, then that's more of a problem than no education. And finally, your move against materialism, I think, well, you're the economist, you have to do that a bit gradually. If everybody stopped buying fridges and stuff, you'd have more unemployment and more problems.
Fake news is another manifestation of deterioration of governance and ethics of collective management. I mean, we have, if you think fake news is bad in politics because Trump got elected with the help of Russians, or Brexit was engineered by yet to be discovered, in business, in the investment community, the information that they do about shares, the buying and selling and making money and dumping, and I can write 2 books about them. And then I was going to say, now if you think that is bad, go to the caring part, the medicine, the pharmaceutical industry. And it goes, it's not a new thing in politics. The only thing that sort of suddenly has hit us is the fact that sort of digital technology has made it possible to communicate quickly and get evidence. And it will become more and more and more. And by the way, that's is going to become and has already become a very psychologically disruptive thing for us as human beings, because we can no longer trust our party. We don't trust our leaders. We don't know, etc., etc. And it's a very destabilizing to go to a corporation and not trust the CEO, not trust the chairman, or go to a country and not trust the president or the prime minister, and it goes on and on and on. With respect to materialism, I'm glad you raised that, because sometimes I get carried away and sometimes I may just get overemphasized and underestimate. Materialism is not a bad thing. Because if it's not in a measure, we are human beings, we have to live. We need to eat and we need to sleep and we need to clothe ourselves. So materialism per se, it's not a bad thing. It's the balance or lack thereof in our definition of how important it is. The same thing about religion, by the way. If you do nothing and go to a cave and say, no, I'm religious and I want to pray and nothing else, well, what are you doing? You're turning religion to a menace. Because not everybody can go to a cave and civilization will stop. So the whole point of ever advancing the civilization that last session I dealt with is about the balancing of these two forces of development. One is material and one is spiritual. And these two need to be balanced in the context. So yes, if I overemphasized or didn't quite recognize the importance of materialism, with respect to phasing in and out, which is one of the points that you mentioned, that if we all stop buying and so on and so forth, unemployment will emerge. My view is that it's not about stopping, it's about rebalancing. For example, we should buy less just because I want and care more, which will employ a lot more people. So if we care more, suddenly we will use the same amount of money, but we will allocate it differently, with a different balance, with a lot more happiness, with a lot more satisfaction, with a lot more joy. Yes, ma'am.
A school system of any kind, do you run schools anywhere in the world?
If you mean in a Baha'i way, no.
Yes.
But if you say, are the Baha'is involved in running the schools? Absolutely. From primary to leadership schools. For example, Poland has got an academy of leadership, moral leadership. They established it for 20 odd years. Yeah. So people who are interested, they go. Canada has got a few institutes. Zambia has got an institute of agriculture training. India has got a few of them.
Which is run
by the Baha'is, in line with the Baha'i principles. Inspired by the Baha'i principles. So there are a lot of radio stations that are inspired by the Baha'is. There are agriculture schools that are, these are not Baha'i institutions, they are inspired. And that's an important, in a way, distinction, because the Baha'is are not trying to seclude themselves from the society and say we are a different breed of human beings. No, we are the same, we have the same challenges, the same egos that we have to deal with every day. But we're trying.
Standing on a mountain, looking across the bay, the queen